Hi, my name's Jordan Marks. I run the National Public Pension Coalition. It's a coalition that's made up of 6 international unions, firefighters, AFSCME, SEIU, NEA, AFT, the AFL-CIO. And it's just a pleasure to be here. We face attacks all across the country, as you know, as public workers, on dues deduction and collective bargaining, and on our pensions. The challenge with these pension attacks is not only does it serve to undermine the union, which is the goal of most of these attacks, frankly, but it also has the potential to leave our members in poverty. And so I'll kind of run through today some of the states that, kind of what's happened in 2012 and some of the states that we're facing in 2013. But I just want to say at the outset again, firefighters are such an extraordinarily important part of our coalition. People like firefighters more than politicians, certainly. Firefighters are the perfect example of why it's not just talking about changing our pension from a defined benefit to a defined contribution, but even on issues like the retirement age. You can't run into a burning building at 60 years old, right? You can't chase a sanitation worker can't chase a trash truck at 67 years old. And so we have an obligation, I think, to tell a very real story. And there's no one better than the heroes that are represented in this room. So it's just very good to be here. So we basically do this. We fund state-based coalitions that face potential threats on a consensus basis. So all across the country, as I mentioned, there is a concerted attack on public pensions, and I'll run through some of those states. We try to take early looks and to find out, where we might best be able to build a coalition. We track legislation, we track our opponents in the news, and we try to come in and say, we will help you fight back. We can help put a plan together and fund a plan that lets every firefighter in every targeted district know they're under attack and that they're given a voice to fight back. So a large part of this is to figure out how we educate membership and how we mobilize our firefighters and the rest of the public workers. We also assist with national messaging. We have done polling in certain states. We have a lot of information on how to talk about pensions, which I'll touch on. And we use research. We help pay for research nationally and in states to focus on protecting your pensions. There is no shortage of information that our opponents wheel out to try to attack our public pensions. We have an obligation to, I think, do specific state-based research to fight back. And so we try to assist in helping that nationally and locally. So we would come in and we'd say, now the first thing I would say is, when NPPC offers a state grant, the first thing we like to fund is a coordinator. It is essentially important that you've got one person that gets up in the morning and goes to bed at night thinking about this public pension campaign, in part because we're all under attack for so much, that it makes it easier when you have one person that's accountable, that works for you, that makes sure everybody's kind of doing what they said they would do, that there's a rapid response mechanism in place for communications, that we're actually, that we're targeting and, and educating union membership. Having one person responsible for that effort, it really can't be understated. And I'm sure I've worked with many of you in this room, and our most successful coalitions are those that have a structure to them that starts with a coordinator. But then we come together and we say, okay, so in Pennsylvania, for example, we know there are 3 Republican senators that we've got to go after. So we think about how do we educate union members and to develop a plan to make sure that their voice is heard in the legislature. Thinking about how we do communications, that there's a method for rapidly responding, that there's a weekly call perhaps to educate reporters, to go to talk to editorial boards. Thinking about how we release white papers in Pennsylvania and in Florida, we face our most serious attacks with legislatures that want to move to a defined contribution system. In those states, we paid for research, NPPC paid for research, and we'll roll it out, basically saying that the plans in Pennsylvania are not only bad for workers, but they also cost more money. Just 2 weeks ago, we did a press event with the treasurer in in Pennsylvania released this white paper, and it got traction all over the state. So thinking about how we disseminate research is incredibly important. Constituency groups are useful to cultivate. Thinking about, we know that Latinos are disproportionately affected. Women are disproportionately affected. In some cases, the clergy and the Conference of Bishops have come to our aid, to stand against attacks on public pensions. The AARP has been an extraordinary ally. They'll put their national will put literally several $100,000 into a campaign to help labor fight back against these attacks. Thinking about how we cultivate other groups is always a part of this work. And then we try to create a timeline and a budget. So like if an effort costs $100,000, we would say NPPC could pay half if you can raise half locally. It doesn't always have to be a one-for-one match, but in general, that's kind of how we work. But we want to fund a specific plan, a specific timeline. If we have to educate union members in these 3 districts over these 3 weeks, we want a plan that everyone's kind of held accountable for. If it's telephone town halls or it's patch-through calls or office visits. If we decide we want to do editorial boards, we want to fund a plan that says, not only will we agree to do these 8 editorial boards, but we'll do it in this timeline. So we try to be as specific as possible. The more structure you can provide, the easier this work becomes. The most dangerous thing, I think, we've seen, I've been doing this for like a year and a half, the most dangerous is to get started late. If there's not an attack in the works, if we're not already reading about it, it may well be coming right down the pike. I'll talk about Pew Foundation and the Arnold Foundation a bit, but they've gone on a crusade. They're like public enemy #1 for public pensions. They've gone on a crusade to undermine public worker pensions. They've sent letters to every governor and every legislative leader saying, we have an option for you. Your pension system's in trouble, we got an option. So there's like a national mood to undermine public pensions. If the fight hasn't come to you yet, it probably will. But I think the most dangerous thing is to get started late. So we try to help focus energy early. And again, we focus on lobbying and communications, member education, and engaging allies. We want everyone to hold regular meetings. There should be like a weekly meeting that all the principals come together and figure out kind of, our plan of action. Are we doing what we said we would do? Are there things we need to revisit? The more structure we can provide, the better off we usually are. Again, we try to use opposition research and also we try to line up third-party validators. The New Hampshire coalition is very, very well run. Is the president here, New Hampshire? Dave? No, Dave? Dave Lang runs an excellent coalition in New Hampshire, and one of the things that he's been very successful at, I think, is bringing, national experts and local experts, so it's not into New Hampshire, so it's not just labor looking like they're self-interested, and protecting their own interests, but you have third-party validators, economists. The last piece about this is that these politicians are so hypocritical oftentimes. If you look at certain states, and Pennsylvania is another example of this, about 7 years ago they voted themselves a pay raise and to increase their pension by 50%. And those same politicians now want to take away the modest pensions of our public workers. Thinking about where we have, in Louisiana last year we had a battle against Governor Jindal. There were like 96 bills in Louisiana that we had to fight. Governor Jindal excluded the governor's office from any of the changes. So he was cutting everybody else's pensions except for his own. And we used that to our advantage, and we ended up in that session escaping all the worst bills, basically. But in addition to like education and communications, we need to get aggressive in terms of our tactics, and exposing hypocrisy is often very useful. So one of the challenges about this work is how you talk about pensions. It gets lost, right? DC, DB, cash balance. It's like it's numbing almost, because it's it's hard to understand. PERS, PSERS, it's like it doesn't mean anything. And I think there's a very easy way that our opponents like to make these attacks about taxpayers versus big union bosses, right? That's how they set these up. But the truth is, if we talk about them as teachers, as firefighters, as police officers, as nurses, versus the politicians who failed to do their job, if you look at a place like Illinois, who failed to pay into the system for years. That changes the way this battle's set up. And it's very important that we use membership, rank and file membership, to tell our story. If your firefighters don't get Social Security and you get just a modest pension, and politicians are trying to take that away, we need to show that you'll retire workers into poverty. I mean, there are very real impacts of these cuts, and it becomes incumbent upon us to make sure that we're not falling into their narrative of taxpayers versus big unions. We want to always keep the message very simple. If we encourage workers to call their legislators, it's often, I'm a firefighter and I vote. Don't you dare touch my modest pension. If you don't get Social Security, you might add that in as well. We always want to highlight that workers put their life savings into these pension plans. One of the things we find through polling is people think that public pensions are like a taxpayer giveaway, that are unaffordable. But that changes when they find out that workers put their life savings into these pension plans. They don't have a choice. In Illinois, workers, every single paycheck paid into the pension system. My politicians decided not to. In Pennsylvania, in Kentucky. Our worst funded systems are not poorly funded because workers didn't pay in. They always did. It's the politicians who totally, recklessly fail to do their job. Then the economy crashes, and it leaves our pension funds in some places in bad shape. But highlighting the fact that we put on our life savings is an important part, I think, of how we fight this. It's also important to know that pensions are modest. Now, firefighter pensions are usually more generous than for AFSCME, for example. But still, it's not, you're not getting rich off of your pension, and the average public pension is about $22,000. That's not, again, true just for firefighters, but if you average teachers, firefighters, AFSCME workers, SEIU. But making sure that people know that is essential. We're not talking about $100,000. They love to cite a $100,000 pension a lot. Carl DeMaio, this politician out of San Diego, loves to cite this librarian who got a $100,000 pension. But the people that get those pensions are like the governor's chief of staff. I think in this case, the librarian was like the director of the library system. That's not true. Your average firefighter doesn't have a $100,000 pension, right? Your average trash truck driver does not have a $100,000 pension. When people also understand that workers don't get Social Security, that changes the dynamic. Literally, all you have to retire is your modest pension if you don't have Social Security. You take away our pensions, it'll cost more in housing vouchers, in food stamps. But how we show, we have to be careful about how we show and clear about how we show the real impact of these cuts. Again, we want to expose hypocrisy. We should not be afraid. And these are decisions that are always up to a state coalition because you know the dynamics in your state way better than I do. But we are happy to help pay for certain sets of research. If they voted themselves a pay raise, we should know that. If they excluded themselves or exempted themselves from legislation, we should point that out. It helps us. These battles are so difficult. We need every tool in our arsenal to fight back. Exposing hypocrisy is essential. And then the last point is that no one's more committed to the solvency of these pension funds than the men and the women that depend upon them. It's important that we're at the table. In Kentucky, in Illinois, we have our own plan. Labor put together with the help of the international unions and the NPPC, our own plan. In Illinois, which I'll talk about in a moment, workers offered to pay 2% more and to close $5 billion in loopholes. So thinking about how we come to the table, and there's international support, I think, to help develop some of these plans. So in 2012, this was our map, basically. And in 2013, this is what we're looking at. Our most serious fights, our fights are all over the place, but we're looking at a very difficult fight in Florida and Pennsylvania and Illinois, perhaps in Nevada and Arizona, Louisiana again. This list is probably not comprehensive enough. So just take a look at 4 quick states. So Florida, and I'm just going to go through these examples because they can be useful to just kind of understand the lay of the land, and sort of the tactics that we're employing. So in Florida, they've got almost fully funded pension system, like 87% funded. There is not a problem with their public pensions, but the House Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader have an ideological agenda to undermine public workers, to move to a defined, in the House, they want to move to a defined contribution plan. In the Senate, they want to move, basically right now they have an option where you can go defined contribution if you want to, and the Senate bill in Florida would make it mandatory that you go into the defined contribution bill. We're fighting it tooth and nail. I don't know if Gary Rainey's here. Is Gary here? So Gary Rainey, the president.
He had to stay in Tallahassee for that reason.
Yeah. So they're right in the middle of a very difficult fight, and Gary does an excellent job. He's just a great leader. But I'll tell you what, when we face these fights around defined contribution plans, they're almost easier than the other battles that we face because we have very good arguments on our side. I'll try to say this quickly and not to bore you, but like when we show that a move to defined contribution plan will cost more money, it makes it an absurd, choice for Republicans, conservatives, or Democrats to go down this path. It's not only bad for workers and will leave people in poverty, there's a retirement crisis that's looming, but it also costs more money. And I'll just tell you just really briefly why it costs more money, and you may already know this, but basically, if you close the defined benefit plan and move to the defined contribution 401k plan, you have to, at the end of the day, when your last worker retires, you don't want to still have an unfunded liability. So instead of paying off the unfunded liability, in Illinois it's $96 billion, instead of paying off the unfunded liability over 30 years, it's like any mortgage, you've got to pay it off over 15 years. That means the state's payment next year is about to double, if not more. The other issue that costs more money when you move to a defined contribution plan is that because you're taking on, because your time period is shorter, like any time you invest, the 100-year rule, you're not investing over 30 years anymore. You're now investing over 15 years. You have to assume less risk. You assume less risk, you have to assume a less of rate of return. That expands your unfunded liability. I mean, we have our work cut out for us to explain this to legislatures. We do it through research that we discussed. We do it through experts. But not only will this legislation in Florida leave workers in poverty, they can't afford it. They have a very good, they have a very good coalition that's set up in Florida. They have a coordinator that we fund, and they have a press person. And they're doing very good work to fight back. They engage in member education and mobilization. We do this through telephone town halls for the most part. I don't know if you've ever done telephone town halls, but they are a very easy way to communicate with your membership. It costs like 15 cents a member. You can pick the certain Senate, House districts you want to choose, and it basically works like this. It'll be like, I'm Jordan Marks, tomorrow, please answer your phone. This would be like a robocall that would go out like on a Monday, let's say, if your telephone town hall is on Tuesday. A robocall that says, I'm Jordan Marks, your pension's under attack. Tomorrow night, your union president wants to talk to you about this in an important town hall. Please answer your phone at 7 o'clock tomorrow night to join the telephone town hall. The next day, same call goes out, please join the call, your pension's under attack. We literally get thousands of firefighters and teachers and trash truck drivers on the phone at one time. It makes it very easy to communicate with workers, and then we can mobilize if necessary. So they're doing a pretty aggressive job, I think, and their fight is in the Senate, I think, in Florida. But they're doing a very aggressive, a good job. We're doing research in that state, as I talked about. They're doing, the firefighters just last week did a big event at the Capitol showing that these 401k plans that the Republicans want to implement leave out disability. So thinking about how we use press around that is important. Gary organized a very good press event. In Florida in particular, we focus on Hispanic media. There are, in Miami, there are a few senators who represent a lot of Cubans. We know that Latinos are disproportionately affected by these changes, so we try to be aggressive in cultivating Hispanic media. So Illinois, as I said, Illinois's got a $96 billion unfunded liability. They literally can't afford their pension payments, and it is, it is a very difficult fight. It's a Democratic state. Democrats control, both houses and the governor's office, and they have very strong constitutional protections. So current workers, it's very difficult to do anything for current workers. The governor is running around the state, saying basically, do you want to pay for teacher pensions or smaller class sizes? Do you want to pay for firefighters' pensions, or do you want to pave roads? It's these like false choices. Literally, budgets make thousands of decisions. It's not fair to say it's this or it's that. And in Illinois, a number of workers, I believe firefighters don't have Social Security, teachers don't get Social Security. You take away their pension, you're going to leave them in poverty. But I think one of the things that we're seeing is when you have these challenges, like a $96 billion unfunded liability, the governor, the leaders, they're going around the state talking to social service organizations and saying, we can't fund you because we got to fund pensions. And the coalition has to do a very good job of keeping social service organizations with us, people that traditional allies with us, and also labor, building trades and others are often opponents, frankly, because they buy into these arguments that we can either fund roads and bridges and get members back to work, or you can pay for public pensions. The coalition's got a very aggressive plan. As I mentioned, they developed a white paper, which we released and did editorial boards. They did it with the assistance of Ron Satoff here at the International Association of Firefighters, through the International AFSCME. So we basically put a plan together that said, we're willing to pay 2% more, we'll close $5 billion in loopholes, and here's the impact of the changes you're going to make. Now, ultimately, I don't know that, I don't know that we get our way, but labor's doing a very good job there of showing that we want to be part of the solution, and NPPC can assist with that. They have a very, very good coordinator too, and it's just another example of where when you have a good coordinator, you really can keep people together and mobilized. So Pennsylvania has a $40 billion unfunded liability. The state, they want to move to 401k plans for all new workers, which we need to show will cost a fortune. Republicans control the House and the Senate and the governor's office. We have got a big fight on our hands. I don't know if Art's here, but Art Martinuska is your excellent president in Pennsylvania. Labor believes that, I think, the governor, who's a Republican, is vulnerable in 2014. So part of, I think, our fight here is to, like, if we can beat him on pensions and some of his other agenda, I think that labor thinks that's a big step towards defeating him in 2014. So I think we're, as he's unpopular, the governor's unpopular, we're doing all that we can to educate members, to get them to make their voices heard. In Pennsylvania, 30% of teachers voted for Governor Corbett in 2012. And as you can see, he's like proposing, all these cuts that aren't in their interest. So part of our work there is to think about the political ramifications and connect it to pension work. We're doing editorial board outreach all through the state. We have a series of research that's scheduled that we're going to unleash, and we try to do it with newsmakers. As I mentioned, the treasurer in Pennsylvania did the first paper. We have third-party validators. AARP has been to Pennsylvania to testify, to do public events. There are others. There are economists. One thing I would say, though, I think that in Pennsylvania, labor's kind of taken a siloed approach where normally we fund organizational activity that everybody kind of buys into. In this state, I think it's more fair to say that outside of the communications component, the mobilization, it's really kind of firefighters, organizing. It's AFSCME organizing independently. Normally, we would want to fund, I think, a more coordinated effort. But on press, editorial boards, for example, it's firefighters that go in with AFSCME workers that go in with an economist. So my last state that I'll talk about is Kentucky. Kentucky is a very important state. Joe Bear he's here. Joe Bear's another great leader. Joe Bear, how are you? So Kentucky's a very important state for this reason. Has anyone not heard of Pew Charitable Trusts? So Pew, they fund, Sesame Street. They have such a good name. They fund dental programs for children, poor children. They've also engaged in a $12 million effort to undermine public pensions. And Pew's got such a good name, making them so dangerous. Kentucky's the first state they've kind of come in from soup to nuts. They've partnered with this a foundation called the John and Arnold Foundation, and they fundamentally believe that public pensions are not sustainable. There's an incentive to underfund. States are loath to raise revenue, and they're cost drivers. That's their belief. So they come in with a very good name, and they say, your state, you got trouble, we're going to help you. And they're ideological, and we're at war with them in Kentucky. Joe Bear's done an excellent job leading that coalition, and we may well, we're a day away from the end of that session. But it's a state that does have a challenge. They're 30% funded. They literally can't afford their pension payments. It's also a place where we're seeing the emergence of cash balance plans. So cash balance plans are this, basically. They're still a defined benefit, But instead of taking your top 3 years or 5 years average salary and costing out what your final benefit will be, it takes your whole length of service. So if you started at making $30,000 and retire making $70,000, your pension is going to be, under a cash balance plan, much lower because you're factoring in all of those years instead of the last 3 years, your $70,000, $69,000, $68,000 you might have made. And it's what Pew is pushing, and they're aggressively pushing it. But we're fighting them tooth and nail. Their numbers were sloppy in Kentucky. I know the firefighters hired an actuary to look at Pew's numbers to show they were sloppy. And Pew's very sensitive to criticism. And it turns out at the end of the day, the plan that they're proposing for workers will cost $55 million more than the current plan. So they're hurting workers, and their plan costs more money. It's like it's enough to drive you nuts. But the coalition's done a very good job. They've done editorial board meetings. They've done press. They've gone after Pew. They've lobbied aggressively. They've leveraged their relationships. They've engaged AARP. They've engaged a Kentucky policy organization. They've done an exceptional job. I think we may. I don't know how this ends, and Joe could speak to it better than I could. But they're putting up a very, very good fight. They also have an excellent coordinator. So I talked about Pew, so I won't talk about this for too much longer, but except to say we know that they're in 4 states for sure. We know they're in Nevada, we know they're in Arizona, in Kentucky, and in Montana. But that's probably not the only places that they are. And frankly, the more information that you could provide to us, to Ron Satoff at your International, to others, the better off that we'll be. Because we can fight them back. We can run our own numbers. We can go right after them, expose them for what they're trying to do, but not if we don't know that they're there. So part of my job is, as I said, to build coalitions early. This kind of intelligence gathering is very important. And there are ways that we can help to fight back. There's language we've used that we can share from other states. So I'm almost done here. Dedicated staffing. The lessons that we've learned, I think, over the past year and a half is dedicated staffing is essential. Because we're under attack for so much, having one person to coordinate all the efforts that works for you is hard to overstate. In some places, we're also able to put a communications person on the ground. There is a narrative that is building across the country that public pensions are not affordable. We have got our work cut out for us in communications. Mobilization research, it's not enough. We really have to think about how we communicate with editorial boards and how we communicate with press and call them on their factual inaccuracies. Part of the work that we do in states around press is really geared towards the legislature, so that we can, we're not going on broadcast television with a public pension message. That's cost prohibitive. So oftentimes our press work is really geared towards moving legislators, and it's very important, but essential to have staff to do that. The second part is, as I mentioned, cash balance plans. They're difficult to fight. They are this new thing that's being pushed by Pew and by others. The education reformers also buy into the cash balance because they believe that you should teach for 5 years and go be an investment banker. So they would like to see pensions be more portable, and so take your first 5 years you should be able to take away your pension when you leave. So the education reformers have kind of piled on, but cash balances, we've got resources to fight. We've got language around cash balance plans. We can think about what might work in your state, in your city. The third piece is research. Again, we want to help fund research in your state. We've got national research, but it's better to have something from Kentucky, from Oklahoma, from Texas, than to have something national in most cases. But it takes time to plan for that, so I think thinking early about what research you think you need. Is it why your public pension is good? Is it why defined contribution is bad? Is it why workers who don't get Social Security will be in poverty? So we need to think about what would work for your state and get it in the hopper, because it takes weeks or months to get research done, so we can't start early enough. And every state would be a little bit different. I have got research documents and research proposals that we can share with states and cities. If you were interested to see kind of what we funded in other states, we can share that with you. We have to better engage our allies. It's not just the public workers here. It's building trades. In Illinois, there are a whole host of social service organizations that are pushing for tax reform. They all should be with us. We're very vulnerable on these public pension attacks. We need to make sure that everybody that we've worked with in the past is with us now. and we want to leverage those relationships. So this is not a full list, I don't think, of our battles. As I mentioned, Pennsylvania and Illinois. Looks like we won't have a fight in New Jersey. New Mexico's about to settle their battle. But these are a list of the states that we're looking at, and there will be more. And this is my information. This is my cell phone number. Again, I work with many of you and your state coalitions already, and it's been a pleasure to do it. This is my cell phone. I'm always around, and my email.